Everybody has a desire to find happiness. We spend such a great deal of time chasing after it, but if we don't know the true meaning of the word happiness, how can we ever expect to find it? Hi, I'm Bob Ostrom, Creative Director for Tilt 365, and today I have a very special interview with Pam Boney, CEO and founder of Tilt 365, to discuss the idea of happiness.
You're watching Tilt Video, strength-based personality assessments that grow people beyond a personality type.
Today, I'm joined by CEO and founder of Tilt 365, Pam Boney, and we're going to be talking a little bit about happiness. Pam, welcome, and thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thanks, Bob. I'm delighted to be here with you.
So today we're discussing the topic of happiness, and I know everybody wants to be happy, but what does it really mean to be happy?
You know, if you think about happiness, one of the phrases that kind of comes to mind is the pursuit of happiness and the right that we have as human beings, you know, to pursue happiness. That always interested me. Like, okay, well, we have the right to pursue it, but what the heck is it? You know, how do we know when we are? And truly, I think happiness is, if most people would define it, they'd say, well, it's a momentary experience of joy, and you know, it's pleasant, and it's you know, you feel like your spirit is light. You're probably, you know, either in nature or with someone you love or with family or in some kind of environmental circumstance that also kind of, you know, feeds the experience of joy. So it's an experience, I think. And it's something that we seem to want as human beings. I'm sure a lot of animals have a desire to be happy, but ours is probably the most elusive and complicated. But one thing that I like to think about is that happiness for each person might be really different.
Yeah. So there was a chapter in the Presence book where you talked about part of the reason that you started Tilt, and it had to do with happiness. And I'm wondering if you could tell us that story.
Yeah. So here, I was probably, you know, early 30s when this happened, and so that is something we call in psychology an existential crisis that occurred, and it was. I had been in my probably teens and 20s thinking that, well, what's going to make me happy is to be successful, right? I'm sure a lot of people think that. So I, you know, focused on work and my job and, you know, being successful and getting promoted. And I had done all that and actually had accomplished we were the number one hotel in the world on every key performance metric. And I find myself on stage and I have this great trophy and I should be happy, right? Well, turns out I went back to my hotel room and it was probably one of the saddest nights of my life, I think. It was a moment where I was like, I thought I was going to be happy when I got this big trophy. And what I realized is I'm in the middle of a divorce. Like, you know, my cat is mad at me. I can't keep plants alive, you know, in my house. Like, you know, so I was just in this moment of like, I felt like I didn't have any friends unless they worked with me. You know, so I kind of felt this moment of like, who do I call to share this trophy, you know, like this moment of happiness with? And it really, you know, it was late at night and I was like, well, I could call the night auditor at the hotel, you know, he might answer the phone. And he did, I did do that. I remember that was Chip, and he answered the phone. He was very excited. He said, I'll tell him in the morning, but he was kind of an introverted guy, and, you know, he kind of didn't get excited that much. But anyway, I realized work isn't where happiness comes from exclusively, you know, and I think, so I thought I made a mistake thinking this is going to make me happy. And I think that's what happens in life. We think that if we focus on something in the future, you know, like that cool car we got on order and we're going to get, you know, or, you know, something that is just out of our grasp, like we're going to get wealthy or we're going to have that house we want, or the relationship that we want, you know, when it's about the future, we miss the moment of the experience of happiness right now. And the same thing happens with the past. If we live in the past and, all the things that have happened already, then it's kind of robbing us. We're using our mind to take us away from the potential for having the experience of happiness right now. So the past and the future kind of are distractions, actually, from happiness.
Yeah. So living in the present can be a challenge. What are some of the other factors that help determine happiness?
Yeah, so this is the pursuit that I went on, and one of the things I thought about is that I didn't have the kind of relationships I wanted in my life. So I call that on the tilt framework the heart, the heart. And if we're not tuning into our heart and actually tuning into the hearts of others, then we won't have the community or the family or the relationships or the people in our lives that we really could have wonderful, happy moments with. And if you talk to most people, like their favorite moment, some of their favorite moments are when they were with other people. So heart is one of them. Mind is another one, so that's another factor. Like, what do you let inside your mind? Are you watching serial killer Netflix? And you're watching binging on those. Well, if that's the case, then you're forming wiring in your brain that makes you fearful, about being at home alone at night and hearing noises outside, so if you're feeding your brain information that's scary, and so I know some people love this kind of stuff, like I don't, but they love this stuff, and that kind of makes them happy in some way. I can't explain that, but I think that if we're feeding ourselves, like happy shows, that are funny, like that are, make us feel delighted, make us feel safe, etc. Or we're experiencing relationships in the community around us that are like that, then we're feeding our mind good things. And so we're able to, think more positively, think in a way that helps us to thrive and be happier. And then the third one is body and gut. And, so really easy to be unhappy if we forget our bodies and don't take care of our bodies. So if we don't move, moving creates happiness. And so if we forget to move, or we don't stretch enough, or, some of these kinds of things, moving our bodies give us joy and happiness in the moment. And it is our nature, to be tuned into our gut and our body and take care of it. And then the fourth one is spirit. And that's our creativity, our imagination, color, aesthetic beauty, nature, all the things that lift our spirits and help us to feel hope in the moment, that the world is good, and, there are good things out there that we can focus on. So imagine, like, we've been through a rough couple of years here, and watching the news too much. If you are, tuning into all the things like that are happening all over the world, and the news loves negativity, then, it's going to be hard to have an experience in the moment of happiness right after we've watched the news. And not that we ignore the world. We can't ignore the world, but we need to think about, when something's happening, like, war is breaking out like we're experiencing right now. What can we do for our own part that's going to help spread goodness? And you can see this all over the world. People are doing that. So that's the capacity that we have as human beings, that even in the face of, great tragedy, we can still focus on doing good for and with each other. And that creates happiness.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, I feel like happiness is this thing that we're forever chasing. It's so elusive, How do we stop chasing it and get to a point where we can finally embrace it, to a point where we finally feel whole and we can enjoy it for what it really is?
Yeah, and what you're referring to is the focus on the future on that one. You know,
Mhm.
when we're chasing it, we're focusing on a future. So we're focusing on I'm going to be happy when I have that car, or I'm going to be happy when I'm rich. I'm going to be happy when I have that my person, my relationship. I'm going to be happy when I have kids. Um, that's a future focus that robs us of the present moment of joy right now, and it could even prevent us from getting some of those things, because we're grasping for it right now. It makes us kind of not that fun to be around, so we might elude actually the experience of happiness. So I guess I would say it isn't something that we can have and be done with it. Like, it isn't once and done. It isn't something that, like, oh, good, I'm happy, I got it, I'm on it. It's something that we have to practice, and we have to remember to come back to ourselves.
Yeah. So, it seems like we only have so much control over external circumstances, like something happens and I react, or something happens and it might change the way that I feel. But I'm wondering, what are some things that we can do to be more intentional about creating inner happiness?
Yeah, so I kind of think of the mind as, it has the potential for negativity, and it has the potential for positive thinking. And whatever we pay the most attention to, maybe we water the seeds of the dark, and we're gonna create more dark thinking and more dark experience. But if we nurture that fearful part of ourselves that kind of says, like, oh, something bad's gonna happen, it happened before, and it's gonna happen again. And I can get caught up in that. Everybody does, right? So when we experience something familiar that didn't go well the first time, it was horrible maybe. As soon as we get a clue that that's happening again, we can start ruminating, obsessing about it, and kind of proliferating it, and we're basically watering the seed of negativity when we're doing that. So the way to try to stay in a more of a happy state and not let the world around us dictate how we feel and how we think about it, we just need to practice, I think, mindfulness to be able to notice, oh, I'm ruminating on that thing that happened before. I'm sensing that it might happen again, and it's all about me. Like, so it's usually a myopic, oh, that's going to happen again. I'm going to be unhappy again, And so we kind of make it worse than it is, and we take it personally. And, there are a number of things that we start thinking that we're like, yeah, poor me, like, that sucks. That's going to happen again, But if we find ourselves ruminating or obsessing about that in a negative way, or being critical or complaining or blaming, or some of the things that make us suffer, whenever we notice it, all we have to do is stop and say, oh, I'm ruminating, like, I'm exaggerating, probably, I'm kind of even extrapolating from the past and making the present miserable, by believing that the past is going to repeat itself, even though this present moment is very unique and different than what we've been through in the past. So, yes, bad things happen, but it's how we interpret that, and it's, do we, try to think about, what might be good in that situation instead, and how can we make the best of it? Like what I was referring to about the world being at war. What is it that we can do in our little corner of the world that might help people not suffer because of it? There's going to be enough suffering as it is. So we're only responsible for our part. I think another thing that robs us of our happiness is thinking that, oh, the world's just going to pot, so we can really lose a lot of our presence by focusing on, obsessing about, and getting all tangled up and suffering in ourselves about the world, the state of the world, Well, if you think about it, 100 years ago, we didn't have televisions, we didn't have social media, we had no idea what was happening, that there was a tidal wave happening across the world, or there was a tornado that wiped out a village, or, you know, things like that. And so now that we have all this negative news, um, you know, we can lose ourselves in so much overwhelm of suffering in the world.
So, Pam, we talked about presence earlier, and I wanted to bring this up because one of the things that you had mentioned was how before the interview, when we were prepping for the interview, you were able to recenter and bring yourself back into the present moment. So, the reason I brought this up was I was hoping that you could share some of those techniques with our listeners in case somebody might like to try this at home.
Yeah, so I knew that we had rescheduled this a couple of times, and I was feeling bad about that. And I knew, like, I hadn't had a shower, first of all. That usually makes a day not go so well. But I hadn't had my shower. I did my workout this morning, and I didn't have such a good workout this morning. I was kind of feeling sore because I fell down the stairs the other night, as I was telling you. And also, I've had some emotional stuff happen recently. So I was feeling a little bit emotionally raw, but I thought, I'm not going to cancel that. We got to get this thing. Bob is precious, and I want to have this conversation with him. He's fun to hang out with. So I was like, I'm not canceling it, but I need to attend to myself and, tune in and kind of come back to myself and prepare. So I made myself a nice cup of tea. I put some honey in it, which I like, little treat. And I went out on the back deck, which is on the marsh, and it's beautiful. And it's the spring, so the fish are jumping and the birds are chirping, and there's even a little alligator out there that I'm looking for. But I sat out there for like 15 minutes and just tuned in to nature, tuned into myself, like, being kind about the emotions that I've been experiencing a little bit lately, and just kind of, like centering myself and kind of coming back home.
So being intentional about finding that personal space and time.
Yeah, for sure. But one thing I also wanted to bring up is that each decade of life, as we age, we're going to encounter some kind of existential crisis. So, we're going to interact with the world. And, we're going to get fired from a job. We're going to have deaths happen. We're going to have losses. And each time we encounter a crisis like that, that's when we have a chance to kind of tune into, who am I and how will I respond to this crisis? Will I let it get me? Will I let it tear me down? Will I let it shrink my influence in the world? Will I let it shrink me and my way of thinking about myself? Or will I embrace it, be with it, sit with it, process the emotions related to it, and learn from it, and actually grow beyond it. So, or grow with it, really is a better way to say it. Take it with us, so that we have an even greater experience of ourselves as being more resilient, more wise, more experienced than we were in the previous decade. And I think it's when we gloss over an existential crisis like that and we don't deal with it, we suppress it, or we ignore it to our own peril. And we don't sit with it and be with it ourselves and understand what the meaning of it is and how we want to grow. Then the next existential crisis becomes that more difficult. So each one of them is like a hero's journey, and we need to accept the lesson. And sometimes it's our karma. It's something that we did, and it's we get a consequence of what we did, and like we need to own that responsibility that what I did here created this outcome. And of course there's also, we encounter things that we had nothing to do with as well, so we don't have 100% control over our happiness, our experience of happiness, but it's what we think about and how we interpret our clash with the universe, I guess you would say. When those things happen that determine who we're going to be next time.
It's funny, you're talking about experience, and that's when you suddenly realize, yeah, I've been down this road before. How am I going to handle it this time? Am I going to deal with it, or am I going to just push it to the back burner again?
Yeah. Yeah, it's what we don't address becomes more powerful over us, and it causes us to operate from fear rather than from inner strength and resilience.
When we are sort of in this space of fear, it's sort of a reactive as opposed to a proactive stance. So when you're proactive, you feel like, well, I have some control, I have some agency over my life. And then when we're reactive, or we're in that fear state, it's sort of like, how do I not have this
Yeah.
next thing happen to me?
Yeah, the deer in the headlights look, right?
Yeah, that's exactly
Yeah,
right.
dodging bullets, right?
It can be really hard to find happiness when we're reactive.
I mean, we're all gonna at some point lose such an important person in our lives, or, just think of the tragedies that people have actually gone through. And you see some of them, do good with that experience and become richer, I don't mean money wise, but, the depth of who they are is more rich. They are more, it carves out more compassion, more empathy, more connection with other people. When we've experienced something very difficult, we don't judge others, so much about it anymore.
So it would seem we have a lot more choice over our happiness than we might think we do.
Hmm. Wow, that's really, yeah. It's all the little moments, right?
Yeah.
That's a great insight you just had there.
I mean, how do you handle them? Do you accept it, or do you fight it?
I always forget to say like how that relates to tilt, but the way that it relates to tilt is that I had this realization that when I pursue being, a better person, like, in alignment with goodness and healthiness and doing the right thing, saying the right thing, being silent when it's important to be silent, like choosing in each moment to be more of a virtue, the virtues, and let go of the vices, let go of the dark things that, want to come up within you. That the more you align with that, the more you actually accomplish getting the things that make you happy, better relationships, better outcomes, better thinking, better future. So all of the things that, making those little habit changes and doing a little bit of work one at a time actually increases, kind of like a stair step, your experience of happiness. The whole tilt research started with the Virtues Project, as you know, that's what I called it for so many years. And I was observing, what are the behaviors that other people do that make me unhappy, miserable, and what are the things that they do that I love and respect, and that I like being with them when they're that way. And so it kind of started out as an observation and keeping records of, what virtues people exhibit that, I love being with them when they're doing it. And then the same thing for myself. And then what things happen in them that are negative that I don't like. And then what is the vice that happens in me that, is the reaction to their negative. So if you can reduce those negatives and increase the positives, then you exponentially kind of eventually increase your experience of happiness, your potential for that.
So what's your part in it? And then what can you do to start to change that thing as your perception changes?
Yeah, well, yeah. And I think, making it real and an example, before I started working on this I would, because I learned to be this way in my family, like sometimes I would be manipulative, or sometimes I would be self, focused, or, like complaining or blaming or whining, or, like gossiping, or lots of different things. Right. those things, when you do them in the moment, you don't know why you're doing them, but they ultimately don't make you happy. They don't make you happy with yourself. You eventually feel bad about yourself. And so your self-concept goes down, down, down. Whereas when you align with doing what you know is right, even if it's hard, and you do that more, then over time you garner more self-respect. And the more self-respect you grow, the more it kind of exponentially grows on itself. And so your self-esteem goes up, not in a way that's kind of arrogant, but in a way that you're like, I'm good with me. Like I'm aligned with my values. I'm good with me. I'm practicing doing what I think is the right thing. And I'm not letting myself get away with negative, nonsense.
That goes a long way towards finding that inner peace that we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm. It's the difference between being skilled in self mastery and choosing to align with your values and being unskilled at it and just doing whatever comes.
Pam, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been really great. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate your sharing what happiness is to you and how we can find happiness for ourselves.
Thank you so much. Appreciate being here.